find us at stopabusecampaign.com online. Let me just start by thanking Congressman Poe and Congressman Costa for their invitation to be here today, the co-chairs of the Victims' Rights Caucus. Our thanks to the House Judiciary Committee for putting us up today, and to their staffs for making all this possible. We're here to talk today about America's children. America's children who pass through our family courts. Because our family courts are a mess. Across the country, our family and divorce court judges are making decisions that are not in the best interests of the children that they should be there to serve. They're not making decisions in the best interests of the children that they are sworn to serve. Now, contested custody cases is really the area that we're talking about, and they make up about 15% of all divorces. Well, we know, because we read the newspapers and watch the television, that divorce is oh too frequent a thing in America today. And 15% of divorces being contested custody cases. This is an awful lot of children, America's children, that we're here to talk about. America's children who are being exposed to violence. America's children who are being returned by family courts to live with the people that they have called out as their abusers, their rapists. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear something like that, I start by saying, how the hell could that happen? How could we be here today talking about children being returned to their abusive parent? Surely that can't happen in this century, in this country, the leading country in the world. Well, the answer, it seems, is that many court professionals have been mistrained to be overly skeptical about reports about domestic violence and child abuse. And when they hear these reports, they don't give them the merit that they deserve. And as a result, they return these children, as we said, instead of to their safe parents, they return them to be beaten or raped again and again. And for many people in this room, the mothers of protective children, you know this story just too well. Research shows that when batterers request custody, 7 out of 10 times they're placed back in the full or partial control of their identified abusers. Now just stop for a moment and imagine that you are that child. You're that child that's called out one of your parents for raping you. And you go to court. And you have this hope that the court will do the right thing and create a safe place for you. But no. Our courts over and over again return these children to be raped over and over again. Surely this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable in human rights terms, but it's also unacceptable in economic terms. On a day where we're still discussing money in Congress, billions of taxpayer dollars are being wasted every single year on the after effects of this trauma, this abuse, this court-mandated trauma and abuse. For the children, sadly, what it means is more suffering, and in far too many cases, it also means death. Their death. Now, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights found that the failure of the United States to adequately organize its state structure to protect children was not just discriminating, but it also constitutes a violation to their right to life. Something that surely this Congress has jurisdiction over, and something that Congress can agree to fix and should agree to fix. Congressman John Conyers of the House Judiciary Committee called for congressional oversight hearings. We support this call. We believe that Congress should put congressional oversight hearings in place. And indeed, our petition asking for that gathers more signatures every day. If you haven't signed it yet, you'll find it at causes.com/family court. Now, just to put this in more real terms, the family courts are the reason why the Netherlands, a country hardly known for being radicals, gave an American family, Holly Collins and her 3 children, asylum as refugees escaping grave danger. We're not talking about a third world country that they were escaping from. We're talking about escaping grave danger in the United States of America. Now, many of you may have seen the documentary, No Way Out But One. If you haven't, I'd commend it to you. And as Holly says in that documentary, and I'm going to misquote her, I'm sure, she went to church on Sundays, she paid her taxes, and she had trust that America's courts would do the right thing. But they didn't. It was left to the courts in the Netherlands to do the right thing and to offer Holly and her children the protection that they deserved and that they needed. Now, when I saw that movie, I ended up thinking of Holly Collins as a heroine, somebody brave enough to stand up to the system, to take her children away and protect them to a foreign country, and to fight to get the protection that she deserved. But what about Elsa Newman, who's sitting in jail today in Maryland, not far from here, guilty of trying to protect her children from her husband's sexual abuse? She's been in jail for years, and she has years to serve. Is she a heroine or a heretic? That's the question we have to answer. Because if she's a heroine, why is she behind bars? Should she be behind bars for protecting her children from rape? I think not, and I think you probably agree. Now, Congress, through congressional oversight hearings, can and should determine the best way forward. However, they may want to start, as many of us do, by asking why our family courts, who are there to divide up property, including our children, why are family courts being asked to handle criminal cases? Surely criminal cases should be tried in criminal courts in front of juries of our peers, but they're not. They're handled in family courts, or more accurately, in the cases that we're talking about, they're gravely mishandled in those family courts. Because when Congress do ask this, they may come to the same conclusion as we do. Criminal complaints belong in criminal courts, whether those criminal complaints are made by adults like you and me, or by our children, because all the research shows that when children cry rape, there are very, very, very few cases where they're making it up. So today, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Joy Silberg, who is going to take us through some of her research and show us some examples of how we can change the system. Hira McLeod, a mother of lost children herself. Donette Lepore, thank you for joining us, another mother of lost children. Eileen King, my friend Eileen King at the end there, who's from Child Justice, and will be speaking to wrap up. Now, at the end of our presentations from up here, we're going to throw it open to the floor. And we'd ask that if you could, keep it down to 1 minute because we're going to need to pack up and go. So it's the 1 minute version of your story. It's who you are and the very brief what happened, and then pass the baton on to the next person, please. So without any more from me, Dr. Joy, thank you very much.
Thank you. You knew my nickname, Dr. Joy. I like that. Thank you for knowing that. When everyone sat down and before everyone started to speak, the room seemed to be filled with a very loud silence. Did you all notice that? There was a heaviness, there was a silence. And in my mind's eye, that silence was filled with screams of children. I heard it very loud in my mind. And it was that heaviness that I think we all sit here with, all of us able to name 5, 10, 20, 30 children that we know personally, that if there was a police officer we could send to a house right now knowing that that child is being raped or beaten or hurt. And yet we all sit here powerless, hoping that our government, someone, can hear the cries of those children and do the things that need to be done to save them. So I'm someone who tries to put my actions where my mouth is, and I've been working on a study that I'm going to share with you. But let me start with maybe giving you a little bit of an insight into the problem. So I was sitting in Anne Arundel County, and I was looking at the wall, and I saw a poster. And here's what the poster said: rights of children. Yay! We've always wanted children to have rights. And here are their rights. To be told that my mother and father will always love me, to love both without being forced to choose or feel guilty, to have decisions about me based on what's in my best interest, not to send messages between mother and father, to be told the breakup is not my fault, to be spared from hearing negative comments about either parent. Someone was paid some money to sit down and write the rights of children and have them posted on the Anne Arundel County Courthouse posters. But what was missing? In my mind, it was very clear something was missing. Why isn't it moving? To live in a home free of physical, sexual, or emotional violence, and not to be forced to love, forgive, or minimize abuser behavior, even if perpetrated by a parent. Why wasn't that on there? That's what all of us need to be asking. Why isn't it on there in the Anne Arundel County Courthouse? Why isn't it on there in the minds of custody evaluators? Why isn't it on there in the minds of judges trying to make decisions about protecting children? Why isn't it there? Because we know that in 75% of all cases that are contested, they will involve some domestic violence or abuse allegations. So why isn't this the right of the child? Because being required to ignore or minimize these events causes me, the child, anger, confusion, guilt, dissociation, and leads me to self-destructive and aggressive behavior, sometimes molds my personality in a way that can never be healed when I'm finally rescued after years of abuse, or when I rescue myself at 18, or when at 18 I'm so demoralized that I think there's no hope for myself or for anyone. It causes me to feel that no one really loves me, even my safe parent, because I notice that that parent gets blamed more and more every time I complain about the violence or abuse. So they stop supporting me. They stop answering me. Why won't anyone believe me when I tell what happened in my house? They always ask, who is telling you to say that? Don't they know I'm old enough to have my own thoughts? Well, we have reasons to believe that this is not just a fairy tale. This is not just a story from a few sad people gathered in this room, but this is an epidemic across the United States. There are strong reasons to believe that abused children in divorcing families are a class of children who are specifically not protected, do not fit under our federal mandates to have state welfare agencies protect children. Some of these children have a website. You should go to it if you want to hear from the children themselves, courageouskids.net. Children are technological. They're starting to speak out. They're starting to tell their stories. If you've been reading any newspaper articles, you might have heard about Hera's case, or some of the other cases in Maryland or around the country. I'm going to let the mothers of some of these cases speak for themselves. We have emails flooding our website from my nonprofit organization, which is called leadershipcouncil.org. If you would like to Google us, we have lots of information on this problem. Newspapers, articles, books, statements from children. Now there is a growing, immense scientific literature that I've just recently reviewed for my last report to the Office on Violence Against Women. There are multiple nonprofit organizations like mine, like Eileen's, who are being flooded. We're overwhelmed. We talk late at night saying, how can you stand up to the pressure of getting more and more emails from mothers and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers who love their children and grandchildren, who know that those children are being forced to be abused. And this is a picture of that lovely girl, Jennifer Collins, who you heard about just now from Andrew, who was saved by her mom, who spirited her. And when she landed in the Netherlands with her and her 2 younger children, she tried to think of the right words to say, and she said, "Give me human rights asylum." And they said, "Oh, human rights asylum, we do that here." It took them several years, but after looking at all of the documents that Holly Collins was smart enough to have packed in her suitcase along with diapers and clothes for her children, they said, yes, it's true. We're surprised that a big country like the United States with such a good reputation would not be able to save this family from abuse, but we agree. We must keep them here, and they lived there in the Netherlands until they were discovered by the FBI 10 years later when the children had aged out of the system. Jennifer is now a big advocate and runs the Courageous Kids Network. In my own hospital, I work at this lovely place in Towson, Maryland. It's not that uncommon a reason for admission that a child will be hospitalized right before a visit to a parent that they've named as a perpetrator, or right after a visit. I remember a little girl, 6 years old, who was trying to jump out of her 2-story bedroom window and came to our ER, and I saw her in my office, and she said, "I was about to see Daddy." Where was I going to see Daddy? At a supervised visit. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, she said, when I go to the supervised visit, Daddy says, "You bitch, you slut." Well, now that didn't make sense. We had the records from the supervised visit. The supervisors didn't mention that Dad said anything like that. But at 6 years old, she could not distinguish where the voice was coming from. It was the voice in her own mind, having heard it over and over and over and over again. The tape continues to play. And we know now, from research that has been done by neuroscientists, that the effect on the brain of even observing domestic violence changes forever the way that brain operates. And that was living proof in my office that that little girl hearing, "You bitch, you slut," when she just saw her father and they're playing dominoes together, was so frightening and overwhelming that she was ready to jump out of her 2nd floor window than to go on that visit, even that supervised visit. The government is listening. Parts of the government are listening to us. The Office on Violence Against Women sought a grant to provide training and technical assistance to judges, attorneys, legal advocates on the problem of battered women losing custody of their children to a batterer or to Child Protective Services. I was lucky enough, as part of the Leadership Council, to have been hired by the Office on Violence Against Women to study this phenomenon. And this is ongoing work that I and my colleagues have been doing for the last 2 years. My colleagues are Stephanie Dallum and my wonderful assistant, Betsy Sampson. Not here today, but with me in spirit. Well, we decided the way that we were going to research this was to look at turned around cases, because so many people said, "My child is being abused, my child is being abused, my child is being abused." And then the newspapers, the media would call the other side, and the other side would say, "No, they're not. The judge says they're not, so they're not." So we decided that the only way to study this phenomenon was to look at cases that we know for sure the children were abused in their previous setting and they get turned around. What does that mean? That means one parent sought to protect his or her child from abuse by the other parent. Evidence of that abuse by the parent was provided to family court during the course of the custody case. The judge presiding over the case did not protect the child and ordered the child to spend unsupervised time with the parent alleged to have abused the child. Just raise your hand if you would fit so far into the category. But then that wasn't enough for a criteria. At a later time, a judge reversed the first decision and protected the child from abuse, or the parent was convicted for abusing the child or another child in a similar manner to what was alleged in family court. Scouring the country over the course of the last 2 years, we have found now 60 cases, 60 turned around cases, where the evidence of abuse that judges have put these children in harm's way is incontrovertible. And these are not minor things. We have children with poker burns on their chests, children who, when social workers came to the houses, they found rats crawling up and down the walls, no food, litter everywhere, and children filled with bruises and scratches and lice. These are not minor cases. I'm going to share with you some of the results of this study. It has just been submitted. Interestingly, it was submitted 11:45 on, when was that? Was that Tuesday night when the government shut down? Monday night? And then 15 minutes later, the government shut down. So I'm thinking, this is some powerful stuff. This is some powerful information that they need to hear. And maybe when everything gets reopened again, this is going to become up there on a higher priority. So these are the states that we have cases from. And what we found at time 1 is we have child sexual abuse as the primary form of abuse. We have physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, medical neglect, domestic violence against the mother. At time 1, 85% of mental health professionals advising the judge either failed to believe the child and the protective parent, or believed the child but still recommended that the child be forced into custody or unsupervised visitation with the perpetrator. What were the judge's rationales for placing the children with the abusive parent? Most of the time it was because the protective parent was accused of some kind of mental malady, such as malicious mother syndrome, parental alienation, something which causes her, out of the blue, to find signs of abuse in her child. These false anti-woman, gender-biased syndromes was the key reason why judges were being misled. There was also fears that the children were going to be kidnapped. Also, the abuser's physical circumstances, having a better house, having a nicer neighborhood, ended up being some of the reasons why the judges chose the abuser to place the child. Over 77% of the time, the protective parent was specifically blamed for the child abuse accusations. In the majority of the cases, there was full custody to the alleged perpetrator. Many of the protective parents had supervised visits. Several of them, during the course of the circuitous nature of the litigation, had periods of time where they did not see their children for months on end. Anybody in this room fit into that category? 65% of the time, full custody was given to the alleged perpetrator. At time 2, reversal. Some stories have happy endings. 21 of the 26 in this initial sample that it was looked at had no contact. Some had professional supervised visits. A few had the opportunity to visit their fathers if they choose, but stated that they were old enough to protect themselves and they could stop whatever was going to happen from happening. 81% were not required to have contact in any way with the alleged perpetrator. How long did it take? From 1 to 10 years, with an average of 4 years for the case to turn around. The 10-year case was a very interesting one. She ended up with her abusive father at the age of 7. At 17, she was dating a boy who noticed bruises all over her body. And he said, "What's happening to you?" And she told him, "I'm being abused at home by my dad. Don't tell anyone. I'm not allowed to tell her. I'll get in big trouble." He said, "I can't date you if you're going to be filled with bruises. Everybody's going to think